The late afternoon sun bathed Blackthorn Manor's gardens in golden light as Dae-young Park walked beside his fiancée, Lady Catherine Worthington, her gloved hand resting on his arm like silk-wrapped iron. The engagement ring on her finger, a family heirloom passed down through 5 generations, caught the light. Flawless. Priceless. A symbol of everything the Parks demanded. Legacy, propriety, bloodline. Everything except love. The caterers need a final head count by Friday. Catherine's voice floated through his thoughts, cultured and measured. Mother insists we cannot have fewer than 300 guests. It simply wouldn't be appropriate for a family of our standing. Dae-young nodded absently, his sharp eyes scanning the garden party guests with the automatic vigilance of a man who'd navigated London's criminal underworld for a decade. String quartet music drifted across manicured lawns. Society matrons clustered near the champagne fountain. Politicians and aristocrats laughed at rehearsed jokes. Beautiful people performing beautiful lies, the only life he'd ever known. Then he saw her. Time shattered. His heart slammed against his ribs so violently he wondered if Catherine could feel it through his tailored jacket. There, seated on an ornate bench beside the rose garden, was the woman who'd haunted every quiet moment for 3 years. Amara Bennett. Her dark skin seemed to absorb and radiate the sunlight simultaneously, creating a warmth that made everything around her look cold by comparison. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo that emphasized the graceful line of her neck, a neck he remembered kissing with desperate reverence during stolen nights when he believed love could conquer the weight of centuries. She wore a burgundy dress that hugged curves his hands still remembered mapping in the darkness, elegant yet somehow modest, borrowed sophistication that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion in her shoulders. But it was the children that made his carefully constructed world tilt violently off its axis. 3 toddlers sat beside her on the bench, maybe 2.5 years old, dressed in matching outfits with tiny suspenders. Their mixed features were unmistakable even from 30 feet away, Asian eyes set in faces that bore Amara's beautiful bone structure and warm brown skin. One held a small cup, another played with a toy, the third gazed up at something in the trees above. The little girl, the one looking at the trees, turned her head slightly, and Dae-young forgot how to breathe. Those were his mother's eyes. His grandmother's eyes. His eyes. Staring back at him from a face he'd never known existed, a face that carried his blood, his features, twisted and beautiful in combination with Amara's. The world narrowed to a single, devastating point of clarity. Amara had been pregnant when he'd destroyed their relationship. When he'd looked her in the eyes and told her she was nothing more than temporary amusement before his real life resumed. When he'd watched her face crumble and walked away believing he was protecting her from the dangerous worlds, aristocratic and criminal, that would have torn her apart. She'd been carrying his children. Darling. Catherine's voice seemed to come from underwater. You've gone quite pale. Are you feeling unwell? He couldn't answer. Couldn't look away. Amara's gaze found his across the manicured lawn, and every trace of color drained from her face. For one suspended heartbeat, they stared at each other across 3 years of silence, lies, and unspoken grief. Her hand tightened protectively on the bench, knuckles whitening. The other reached instinctively for the nearest child, the boy with the toy, pulling him slightly closer. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound emerged. The math was brutally, devastatingly simple. 3 toddlers, roughly 2.5 years old. Conceived during those final desperate weeks when they'd clung to each other knowing the end was coming but refusing to acknowledge it. Before his family had discovered their relationship and delivered their ultimatum. Before he'd made the coward's choice and broken both their hearts with words calculated to cut deep enough that she'd never try to find him again. Words that had saved her life, he'd told himself. Words that had clearly failed to account for the 3 small lives now sitting in his family's garden, living proof that some consequences can't be outrun, some loves can't be destroyed by cruelty alone, and some choices haunt you forever. Dae-young. Catherine's concern was growing. Should I fetch the doctor? He'd been a father for over 2 years and never knew it. While he'd attended charity galas and orchestrated criminal enterprises and planned a loveless marriage, Amara had been raising their children alone. While he'd lived in luxury at the family estate, she'd been what? Struggling? Suffering? Doing it all alone because he'd told her she meant nothing? The little girl with his mother's eyes laughed at something, the sound carrying across the garden like crystal breaking, and Dae-young felt something crack open inside his chest that he'd thought he'd sealed shut 3 years ago. "I need a moment," he managed, his voice rough. "Please excuse me." He was moving toward the bench before Catherine could respond, before he could think, before the carefully constructed lies he'd built his life upon could stop him. Amara saw him coming and stood abruptly, one hand on the back of the bench for support, the other reaching for the stroller handle. She was going to run. The realization hit him with perfect clarity. She was going to grab those children, asterisk his asterisk children, and disappear before he could reach them. Before he could speak. Before he could even begin to comprehend the magnitude of what he'd lost. Amara. Her name escaped his lips. A prayer, a plea, an accusation, a confession all at once. She froze, her eyes meeting his with an expression that was equal parts fury, terror, and something that looked heartbreakingly like hope fighting to stay buried. Behind him, he could hear Catherine calling his name, confusion evident in her cultured voice. Around them, garden party guests were beginning to notice the scene, the aristocrat abandoning his fiancée to approach a black woman with 3 mixed-race children. Whispers would already be starting. Scandal was blooming like poison in the afternoon sun. But all Dae-young could see were those 3 small faces turning to look at him with innocent curiosity. 3 children who carried his blood. 3 lives he'd never known existed. 3 reasons everything he'd believed about himself for the past 3 years was a lie. The afternoon sun cast their shadows long across the perfect grass, his approaching, hers frozen, the children small and unaware, as the future he'd planned and the past he'd tried to bury collided with the force of inevitability. Dae-young waited until the garden party had thinned, until the politicians and aristocrats had drifted toward the house for dinner, until Catherine was distracted by her mother's demands about seating arrangements. Then he moved through the rose garden with purpose, finding Amara exactly where he knew she'd be, at the far gate, trying to leave before anyone could corner her with condescending questions about how lovely it was to have her there. She was loading the children into their stroller with practiced efficiency, her movements quick and defensive. The stroller itself told a story, worn fabric carefully mended, wheels that didn't quite align properly, the frame bent slightly on one side as if it had been dropped and inexpertly repaired. Everything about the scene radiated borrowed elegance and exhausted pride. Amara. Her spine went rigid. She didn't turn around, just kept fastening the straps around the little boy, Elijah, his mind supplied from James's report, though hearing it written in cold facts was nothing like seeing the child in person. "Don't," she said, her voice ice cold. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. We need to talk."
No.
She finished with Elijah and moved to the next child, Micah, the quietest one according to the file. "We really don't." Dae-young stepped closer, close enough to see the way her hands trembled as she worked the stroller straps. Close enough to notice the dress she wore was expensive but altered, taken in at the seams by someone who knew their way around a needle but not around haute couture. Borrowed, he realized, or secondhand. Everything about her screamed carefully maintained dignity in the face of poverty. "Are they mine?" Her laugh was sharp and bitter as broken glass. "Does it matter?" She finally turned to face him, and the fury in her eyes was magnificent and terrible. "You made it perfectly clear 3 years ago that I wasn't good enough for your world. That I was nothing but temporary amusement before you returned to your real life." The words hit him exactly as intended, his own poison, thrown back in his face. "I was wrong." "Oh, you were wrong." She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture that somehow made her look more regal than any of the aristocrats preening inside. "Tell me, Dae-young, what part were you wrong about? The part where you called me a distraction? Or the part where you said what we had was meaningless?" "All of it." His voice came out rougher than intended. "Every word." "How convenient." You realize you were wrong, right, when you see I have children who might be yours. She shook her head, turning back to the stroller. I need to leave. My mother is watching them, and she's not well. I can't be late. Amara, please. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. You don't get to please me. You don't get to show up after 3 years with your perfect fiancé and your perfect life and ask me for anything. He could see the exhaustion now, in the fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, in the careful way she held herself, as if every muscle ached. The burgundy dress, beautiful as it was, couldn't hide the weight she'd lost, the way her collarbones stood out too sharply. How did you end up here? He asked quietly. Catherine said something about a charity board. Your fiancé invited me as her diversity initiative. The bitterness in Amara's voice could have stripped paint. She wanted someone from a disadvantaged background to add authenticity to her charity for underprivileged children. She has no idea the irony. What do you mean? I mean, I teach piano and voice lessons to children whose parents can barely afford them. I work at a bookshop in the afternoons. I clean offices at night after my children are asleep. She lifted her chin, defiant despite the exhaustion. I'm one of the underprivileged children your fiancé wants to save. But I showed up in a borrowed dress and smiled and made small talk because I thought it might lead to grants for the community music program. So congratulations, Dae-young. You get to see exactly what happened to your temporary amusement after you threw her away. The pain in her voice was a living thing, and Dae-young felt it like claws around his chest. I didn't know you were pregnant. Of course you didn't know. Her eyes glittered with unshed tears she refused to let fall. You blocked my number, changed your address, disappeared completely. I tried to tell you for weeks, and you made sure I couldn't reach you. So, I stopped trying. Amara, we've survived without you. She gripped the stroller handle, knuckles white. 3 years of surviving. We'll continue surviving without you. She started to push past him, but Nadia, the little girl with his mother's eyes, chose that moment to speak, her voice high and curious. Mummy, who's the tall man? Amara's face crumbled. For just a heartbeat, Dae-young saw past the fury and pride to the devastation underneath, the young woman who'd been pregnant and alone and terrified, who'd been betrayed by someone she'd trusted with everything. Then she smoothed her expression away with visible effort, manufactured calm from sheer will. Nobody, sweetheart. Her voice was steady despite the way her hands shook on the stroller. Just nobody. The words landed like a knife between his ribs. Nobody. That's what he was to his own children, a tall stranger asking unwelcome questions. That's what he'd made himself when he'd chosen cowardice over courage 3 years ago. Amara, please let me help. Whatever you need. I don't need your help. She pushed the stroller forward, forcing him to step aside or be run over. I don't need your guilt or your money or your sudden interest in playing father. Go back to Catherine and your perfect wedding and your perfect life. We're not your problem anymore. They're my children. She stopped, her back still to him, shoulders rising and falling with controlled breaths. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and absolutely final.
No.
They're my children.
Mine.
I carried them alone. I birthed them alone. I've raised them alone while you lived in luxury, without a single thought for what you destroyed. You don't get to claim them now just because your conscience is bothering you. That's not. Goodbye, Dae-young. She walked away through the garden gate, the worn stroller wheels squeaking slightly on the gravel path. Dae-young stood frozen among the roses, watching his past disappear into the London evening for the second time. But this time, she was taking 3 small lives with her. 3 children who carried his blood and didn't know his name. Behind him, Catherine's voice called from the terrace, asking where he'd gone. The garden party continued without him, laughter and music drifting through the perfect afternoon. But all Dae-young could see was Amara's face crumbling when Nadia had asked his identity, and all he could hear was her answer echoing in his mind. Nobody, sweetheart. Just nobody. He pulled out his phone and dialed James Chen. I need everything, he said when his associate answered. Current address, employment, financial situation, everything about her life. And James, I need it tonight. Because Amara was wrong about one thing. They were absolutely his problem now. And he was going to fix what he'd broken, even if it cost him everything else he had. James Chen's report arrived at 11 p.m., a thick digital file that landed in Dae-young's inbox with the weight of an indictment. He read it sitting alone in his study, the Mayfair penthouse silent around him except for the distant hum of London traffic below. Each page was another knife between his ribs. Amara Bennett. Current residence, flat 4B, 23, called Harbor Lane, Brixton. 1 bedroom, 450 square feet. Rent, £1,200 monthly, currently 3 months in arrears. Eviction proceedings pending. Housing applications, 17 in the past 2 years. 17 rejections, each citing vague concerns about suitability or references, despite Amara's spotless rental history before the children. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Discrimination wrapped in bureaucratic language. Employment, piano and voice instructor, 12 students, average income £800 monthly. Part-time bookshop clerk, Foyle's Charing Cross, £600 monthly. Evening cleaning service, Mitchell and Associates, £500 monthly. Total monthly income before taxes, approximately £1,900. After taxes and childcare costs, barely enough to survive. Medical records, the children were healthy but had missed vaccinations, delayed well checks, gaps in care that spoke of a mother choosing between doctor's visits and rent. Amara herself hadn't seen a physician in over a year despite notes from an emergency room visit indicating chronic back pain and exhaustion. Childcare, provided primarily by Amara's mother, Gloria Bennett, age 64, currently managing diabetes and early-stage heart disease. When Gloria couldn't help, Amara brought the children to work or paid a neighbor, a university student, £10 per hour she couldn't afford. Birth certificates, 3 copies, identical except for names and times. Nadia Amara Bennett, born 3:17 a.m. Elijah James Bennett, born 3:45 a.m. Micah David Bennett, born 4:02 a.m. Father, blank on all 3, as if he'd never existed. Dae-young closed his laptop and stared out at the London skyline, the glittering lights of a city full of people living lives he'd never understand. 17 housing rejections. 3 jobs. Medical care sacrificed for rent money. And he'd been living here, 30 minutes away in Mayfair luxury, attending charity galas and orchestrating criminal enterprises while his children's mother chose between groceries and keeping the lights on. He was in his car before he could talk himself out of it. The building in Brixton was exactly as dispiriting as the report suggested, for stories of faded brick, windows that didn't quite close properly, a front door that required buzzing 3 times before it opened. Dae-young climbed stairs that smelled of cooking and damp, past peeling wallpaper and flickering lights, until he reached flat 4B. He knocked before courage could fail him. The door opened a crack, security chains still engaged, and Amara's face appeared in the gap. She wore cleaning clothes, black trousers and a polo shirt with a company logo, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with fury. "How did you find where I live? We need to talk."
No.
She moved to close the door, but he caught it.
Please.
5 minutes. I'll call the police. But there was exhaustion in her voice more than real threat. You can't just show up at my home, uninvited. I know about the eviction notice, the housing rejections, the medical bills. Her face went white, then flooded with color. You investigated me? You had someone dig into my private life. The chain rattled as she fumbled with it, and then the door flew open fully, Amara standing in the doorway radiating rage. How dare you? How fucking dare you? I needed to know. You needed to know nothing. She stepped forward, forcing him back into the hallway. Behind her, he could glimpse the flat, tiny, meticulously clean, children's toys organized in plastic bins, a fold-out couch that clearly served as someone's bed. You have no right to invade my privacy. No right to investigate me like I'm some kind of criminal. I want to help. Help. Her laugh was sharp and humorless. Now you want to help? Where was this generosity 3 years ago? I didn't know. You didn't know because you made sure you wouldn't know. She was shaking now, whether from rage or exhaustion or both. You blocked my number, Dae-young. Changed your address. Disappeared completely. I tried to tell you I was pregnant. Called you dozens of times. Dozens. And you made sure I couldn't reach you. The words hit him like physical blows. What? I found out I was pregnant a week after you destroyed me. Tears glittered in her eyes, but didn't fall. I was terrified and alone, and I tried to tell you because despite everything you'd said, part of me still believed you might care. But you'd erase me from your life so completely I couldn't even leave a message. Dae-young felt the ground shift beneath him. He'd blocked her number on his grandmother's advice, changed his address to avoid complications, disappeared cleanly to protect her from his family's reach. It had never occurred to him that she might need to contact him, that she might be trying to tell him something that mattered. Amara, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't pay rent. Her voice cracked. Sorry doesn't feed 3 children. Sorry doesn't make up for 3 years of doing this alone. Let me help now. Please. I'll pay for everything, better housing, childcare, medical care, education. Whatever you need. You think you can buy your way in? She stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. Buy your guild away? Write a check, and suddenly you're a father? Suddenly, you didn't destroy me? That's not what I'm trying to do. Then what are you trying to do? The tears finally fell, tracking down her face though her voice remained steady. Because from where I'm standing, you're a rich man who wants to ease his conscience by throwing money at the problem he created. I want to know my children. They're not yours to know. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of mascara. You don't get to walk back into our lives just because you finally noticed we exist. I needed you then, Dae-young. When I was terrified and pregnant and alone. When I was choosing between paying for prenatal care and paying rent. When I was working up until the day I went into labor because I couldn't afford to stop. You don't get to play hero now. Behind her, a thin cry sounded from inside the flat. Amara's entire body tensed, maternal instinct overriding fury. You need to leave. Her voice was flat now, emptied of emotion. If I see you here again, I will call the police. I will file a restraining order. Whatever I have to do to protect my children from you. They're my children too.
No.
She met his eyes with devastating finality. They're mine. They have been for 3 years. Biology doesn't make you a father. Being there makes you a father. And you weren't there. She stepped back inside and closed the door with controlled care, not slamming it despite the fury in her eyes. Dae-young stood in the dingy hallway, listening to her footsteps fade and a child's crying quiet as she murmured comfort he couldn't hear. The lock clicked with soft finality. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the chipped paint on her door, at the number 4B hanging slightly crooked, at the welcome mat that was worn thin from years of use. 30 minutes away, his penthouse had heated floors and a doorman and more square footage than 20 of these flats combined. His children were growing up here. In this building with flickering lights and damp walls and neighbors too close. Growing up with a mother who worked 3 jobs and sacrificed her health and made impossible choices every single day. And it was his fault. Dae-young pulled out his phone as he descended the stairs, James Chin answering immediately despite the late hour. I need a lawyer, Dae-young said. Family law, the best in London. And I need them tomorrow. Because Amara was wrong about one thing. Those children were his. And whether she wanted his help or not, she was going to get it. It took Dae-young 3 weeks to convince Amara to even speak with him, and another week after that to persuade her to visit his penthouse to discuss the children's futures. She'd agreed only because he'd promised to set up trust funds to ensure Nadia, Elijah, and Micah would have financial security regardless of what happened between their parents. She'd arrived tense and defensive, stayed for exactly 40 minutes, and left with papers she'd insisted on having her own lawyer review before signing anything. Dae-young had watched from his window as she walked to the tube station, her posture rigid with pride, and felt something like hope for the first time in weeks. He didn't know his grandmother's driver had been parked across the street, watching everything. The summons came the next morning. Not a request, but a command delivered by the family's longtime butler. Lady Mincio Park required her grandson's presence at Blackthorn Manor immediately. The tone alone told Dae-young everything he needed to know. She'd found out. He arrived at the estate 2 hours later, the familiar sight of the manor doing nothing to settle the dread in his stomach. He'd grown up here, in these halls where portraits of ancestors stared down with judgment, where every room whispered of legacy and duty and the weight of centuries. It had never felt like home. Now it felt like a trap closing around him. Lady Mincio waited in her private study, seated behind an antique desk that had belonged to her grandfather. At 78, she remained formidable, silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, posture perfect despite her age, eyes sharp enough to dissect lies at 20 paces. She'd run the Park family for over 40 years, outlasting her husband and maintaining iron control over their fortune and reputation.
Seat.
She didn't look up from the document she was reading. Dae-young sat, his jaw tight. I assume you know why you're here. She finally raised her eyes, and the coldness in them could have frozen oceans. Or perhaps you thought I wouldn't discover your sordid little secret? Grandmother. There was a woman at your penthouse yesterday. She slid a photograph across the desk. Amara leaving his building, caught mid-stride by a telephoto lens. Amara Bennett, age 28, Black British. Former music teacher at a community center where, I'm told, you volunteered 3 years ago during one of your misguided attempts at social responsibility. Dae-young's hands clenched on the chair arms, but he said nothing. She has 3 children. Mixed race. Approximately 2.5 years old. Lady Mincio's voice was surgical in its precision, cutting away any possibility of denial. Triplets conceived during the period when you were involved with this woman. A relationship you failed to mention to your family until I ended it for you. You didn't end it. I did. At my instruction. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. To protect you from making a catastrophic mistake. To protect this family from scandal. Clearly, we acted too late. They're my children. They're an embarrassment. The words landed like blows. A scandal that could destroy everything we've built. The Park name associated with illegitimate, mixed-race children born to some gold-digging woman from Brixton? Do you understand what that would do to our reputation? To our business relationships? To everything your ancestors sacrificed to build? Amara isn't a gold digger. Dae-young's voice was low and dangerous. She's been raising my children alone in poverty while refusing every offer of help I've made. How noble. Lady Mincio's smile was thin and cold. That makes her an even bigger fool. But her pride or poverty is irrelevant. What matters is containing this situation before it destroys us. There's nothing to contain. They're my children. I'm going to be part of their lives.
No.
The single word carried absolute authority. You're going to resolve this quietly and permanently. I've already spoken with our lawyers. The solution is quite simple. We offer Ms. Bennett a generous settlement. £2 million. In exchange, she signs away any claim to you or your resources and agrees never to contact our family again. She takes her children and disappears. She would never agree to that. Then we move to option 2. Lady Mincio pulled another file from her desk drawer, this one considerably thicker. Our investigation into Ms. Bennett's living situation revealed numerous concerns. Inadequate housing, insufficient income, inconsistent medical care for the children, child care provided by an elderly, unwell relative. Any competent attorney could paint a picture of an unfit mother struggling to provide basic necessities. The room tilted. You're threatening to take my children away from her? I'm offering to ensure they receive proper care. Her voice remained perfectly calm, as if discussing a business transaction rather than destroying lives. They could be placed with a suitable family, well-educated, financially stable, appropriate. Or perhaps one of your cousins could adopt them, raised as Parks, given every advantage, with their unfortunate origins quietly forgotten.
No.
Dae-young stood, fury making his voice shake. Absolutely not. You will not threaten her. You will not use your connections to paint her as unfit. She's an excellent mother who's sacrificed everything for those children. Sit down. When he didn't move, Lady Minceo's voice sharpened.
Seat. Down.
He remained standing. You have responsibilities, she said, rising to face him across the desk. To this family. To Catherine, who you've humiliated by ending your engagement. To our legacy. To the businesses that employ thousands of people and depend on our family's reputation. Not to some woman you had a fling with and her illegitimate children. They're not illegitimate. They're my children. They're bastards. The crude words sounded obscene in her cultured voice. And you're a fool if you think you can claim them without consequences. This family has standards, Dae-young. We have a legacy to maintain. We do not acknowledge the results of casual affairs with inappropriate women. Amara wasn't inappropriate. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it because you convinced me she wasn't good enough for the Precious Park name. She wasn't. She isn't. Lady Minceo moved around the desk, her posture rigid with disapproval. And if you choose to pursue this fantasy of playing father to her children, you'll do it alone. I'm giving you 48 hours to make your choice. Either you accept the settlement offer and end this quietly, or you forfeit everything. Everything. Your inheritance. Your position in the family businesses. Your trust fund. Your membership in the clubs and societies that have accepted you because of our name. All of it. She stepped closer, and for the first time, he saw something like genuine anger beneath the ice. Choose them, and you choose poverty. You'll be cut off completely. No access to family resources. No support. No name. We'll make sure every door that opened for you because your park closes permanently. You'll be nobody, with nothing and 3 children and their mother to support on whatever you can earn without our connections. The ultimatum hung in the air between them, years of family history and expectation weighing down every word. 48 hours, Lady Minceo repeated. Choose wisely. Dae-young looked at his grandmother, this woman who'd raised him after his parents died, who taught him everything about duty and legacy and the weight of the park name. This woman who'd shaped him into someone who valued reputation over love, appearances over truth, family approval over his own heart. I don't need 48 hours, he said quietly. I choose them. Her face went absolutely still. You're throwing away everything for a woman who hates you and children who don't even know you? I'm choosing to be the man I should have been 3 years ago. He moved toward the door, then paused. And grandmother? They're not illegitimate. They're mine. That makes them Parks, whether you acknowledge them or not. If you walk out that door, you're no longer a Park at all. He left without looking back, his grandmother's final words following him through the halls where his ancestors' portraits watched with painted disappointment. By the time he reached his car, his phone was already buzzing with messages. Trust fund access revoked, corporate accounts frozen, club memberships terminated. Lady Minceo worked fast. Dae-young sat in the driver's seat and felt something like freedom settle over him for the first time in his life. He'd lost everything his family had given him. Now, he just had to prove to Amara and his children that he could build something worth having without it. The flat Dae-young found for them was in Clapham, 2 bedrooms, ground floor with a small garden, in a building with proper security and heating that actually worked. Amara stood in the empty living room the day he showed it to her, arms crossed, jaw tight with the internal war between pride and practicality. I can't afford this, she said finally. You don't have to. The trust funds will cover it. Consider it back rent for 3 years of child support I should have been paying. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where her children could actually play safely. This is for them. Not for you. Not for us. I know. And it doesn't change anything between us. I know that too. She signed the lease 3 days later. Dae-young helped her move, carrying boxes up the stairs while Amara's mother Gloria watched with cautious approval and the children explored their new rooms with wide-eyed wonder. Nadia had her own space for the first time in her life. The boys would share, but they'd have actual beds instead of sleeping in their mother's room. Mummy, look. Elijah's voice carried from the garden. We have a tree. It was barely more than a sapling, but to children who'd grown up in a fourth-floor flat with no outdoor space, it might as well have been the Amazon rainforest. Dae-young watched from the kitchen window as Amara stood with her children in their small garden, her face transformed by something that looked dangerously close to hope. The trust funds were established through lawyers, ironclad and generous. Education, medical care, living expenses, everything the children would need until they turned 25. Amara had her own lawyer review every word before signing, looking for traps that didn't exist. "Why are you doing this?" she asked when the papers were finalized. "They're my children." That didn't matter before. It always mattered. I just convinced myself it didn't. He met her eyes across the lawyer's conference table. "I'm trying to be better. Let me try." She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. It was more than he deserved. Spending time with the children was harder than any negotiation he'd ever conducted in business or crime. They were wary of him, these small people who carried his features in their faces but knew him only as a tall stranger who made their mother tense. Micah was the quietest, dark eyes that tracked Dae-young's every movement with solemn intensity, rarely speaking but constantly watching. When Dae-young asked him about his toy cars, carefully arranged by color and size, Micah studied him for a full minute before carefully explaining his organizational system in a voice barely above a whisper. Elijah was his opposite, friendly and talkative, asking endless questions with the fearless curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned when adults found questions annoying. "Why is your hair short? Why do you wear suits? Do you have a dog?
Can we get a dog?
What's your favorite color? Do you like dinosaurs?" Nadia stood between them, protective and watchful, her grandmother's eyes studying him with unsettling perception for a 2-year-old. She stayed close to Amara during his visits, one hand always clutching her mother's clothes, ready to intervene if this stranger proved dangerous. "She's like you," Dae-young told Amara during one visit, watching Nadia organize her siblings with quiet authority. "She's had to be." There was accusation in Amara's voice. "Someone needed to help me keep them safe." The words landed like they were meant to, a reminder that these children had grown up without him, had learned early to take care of each other because their mother couldn't do it alone. Catherine found out the wrong way, spotting him at a park in Clapham, pushing Micah on a swing while Amara sat on a bench with the other two. He saw her across the playground, recognition and hurt flashing across her face before she approached with the poise that had been bred into her since birth. "Catherine, is this why you ended our engagement?" She looked at Amara, at the children, understanding dawning. "The woman from the garden party. These are your children." There was no point in lying. "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment, watching Elijah chase a ball while Nadia stayed protectively close to Amara. "They look like you. The eyes especially."
Catherine, I'm sorry.
"Don't." She held up a hand. "I'm not angry. I'm hurt, yes, but I'm also relieved." She met his gaze with unexpected honesty. "Our engagement was always more arrangement than romance. We both knew it. I was prepared to build a life on that foundation, but I'm not heartbroken it ended. You deserve better." "So, do they?" She nodded toward the children. "Your family won't forgive this, Dae-young. You need to be certain this is what you want because there's no going back once they know." "They already know. My grandmother gave me an ultimatum. I chose them." Something like respect flickered in Catherine's eyes. "Then I hope they're worth everything you're about to lose." She left with her dignity intact, and Dae-young watched her go while wondering if he'd ever had that kind of grace. The threat started a week later, subtle at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence. A car following Amara's route home from the bookshop. Hang-up calls at odd hours. Someone asking questions about her at the community center where she taught. Then they escalated. The bookshop received a call threatening violence if they continued employing certain people. Amara's mother found threatening notes in her mailbox. Someone slashed the tires on Amara's car. The used sedan Dae-young had helped her buy so she wouldn't have to take 3 children on the tube. James Chin confirmed what Dae-young already suspected. Victor Chin, his rival in London's organized crime hierarchy, had learned about the children and saw vulnerability. Leverage. A way to hurt Dae-young through the family he'd tried to keep hidden. You need to distance yourself, James said. Publicly. Make it clear they mean nothing to you, and Chin will lose interest. Dae-young stood in his penthouse, soon to be lost when his grandmother followed through on her threats, and stared at photos of Nadia, Elijah, and Micah that Amara had reluctantly shared. 3 small faces that carried his features. 3 lives he'd failed to protect. Maybe walking away again was the answer. Maybe his presence in their lives really did put them in danger. Maybe the noble thing. Don't. Amara's voice cut through his thoughts. He'd called to warn her about the threats, and she'd insisted on coming over despite the late hour. Now she stood in his doorway, fury radiating from every line of her body. Don't you dare. Amara, they're threatening you because of me. They're threatening me because they're criminals and you're involved in that world. That's your problem to fix, not ours to pay for by losing you again. I'm trying to protect you. Don't you dare use protection as an excuse for cowardice again. She stepped into his apartment, closing the door behind her with controlled force. You did this 3 years ago. Convinced yourself that destroying me was noble because it kept me safe. Look how well that worked out. This is different. It's exactly the same. You're looking for a reason to run because being a father is hard and scary, and you don't know how to do it. Her voice cracked. But you don't get to make that choice for them. For us. If you want to be in their lives, be in their lives. Fight for them. Protect them by dealing with your criminal associates, not by abandoning us again. And if I can't keep you safe, then we'll figure it out together. She moved closer, and he could see tears glittering in her eyes. But don't pretend abandoning us is noble. It's just you being a coward again. The words hit him exactly where she'd aimed them, at the truth he'd been avoiding. He'd chosen his children over his family fortune, but he was still looking for ways to maintain distance. Still terrified of the vulnerability that came with genuine connection. I don't know how to be a father, he admitted quietly. Then learn. Show up. Be present. Make mistakes and do better. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But don't walk away again and pretend it's for our own good. My children deserve better than a father who only stays when it's easy. She was right. She'd been right about him from the beginning. He'd always chosen the safe option, the path that protected him from real vulnerability. Even now, faced with threats from his criminal world, his first instinct was to run. I'll handle Victor, he said finally. Whatever it takes. And then I'll keep showing up.
For them.
For however long you'll let me. Amara studied him for a long moment, searching for the lie, the escape clause, the hidden cowardice. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded once, sharp and final. Don't make promises you won't keep. They've already lost you once. They won't survive losing you again. She left him standing in his penthouse with the weight of her words and the knowledge that protecting his children meant more than just throwing money at problems or walking away to keep them safe. It meant staying, fighting, choosing them every single day, especially when it would cost him everything else. The social worker arrived on a Tuesday morning while Amara was getting the children ready for their playgroup. She answered the door expecting a package delivery and found instead a woman in her 40s holding an official ID and a clipboard thick with papers. Ms. Bennett? I'm Sarah Crawford from Child Protective Services. I'm here to conduct an emergency welfare assessment regarding Nadia, Elijah, and Micah Bennett. The world tilted. I'm sorry, what? May I come in? It wasn't really a question. Amara stood frozen for a heartbeat, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. Had someone reported an incident at playgroup? Had one of the children said something that sounded concerning out of context? She stepped aside numbly, letting the social worker enter, while her children watched with wide, curious eyes from the living room. Sarah Crawford moved through the flat with practiced efficiency, making notes on her clipboard. She inspected the bedrooms, checking for adequate space and safety concerns. She examined the kitchen, opening cabinets, and the refrigerator. She asked to see medical records, proof of income, documentation of stable housing. Ms. Bennett, I need you to understand this is a serious matter. Sarah's voice was sympathetic but professional as they sat at the kitchen table, the children playing in the next room under Gloria's watchful eye. We've received multiple reports raising concerns about the children's living situation. Multiple reports. Amara's hands shook as she gripped her tea mug. From who? The sources are confidential, but they've cited concerns about housing instability. You moved 3 times in the past year before your current residence. They've mentioned inconsistent employment, gaps in the children's medical care, and potential exposure to dangerous individuals. Dangerous individuals? The pieces started clicking together with horrible clarity. This is about Dae-young. Sarah checked her notes. Dae-young Park is listed as the biological father? Yes, but the reports indicate he has connections to organized crime. That his presence in the children's lives may expose them to danger. That you've been accepting financial support from him despite knowing about his criminal activities. Amara felt ice spread through her veins. Who filed these reports? I can't disclose that information. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Miss Bennett, I can see you love your children. The flat is clean, they appear healthy and well cared for. But I have to take these allegations seriously. If you can't demonstrate stable housing, steady legitimate income, and a safe environment free from criminal influence within 2 weeks, I'll have no choice but to recommend temporary placement while we conduct a full investigation. Temporary placement.
The words tasted like ash.
You mean take my children away from me? Only until we can ensure their safety and well-being. After Sarah Crawford left, Amara sat at her kitchen table staring at the list of requirements: proof of income stability, documentation of medical care, verification of housing security, character references from people with no connection to criminal elements. All of it reasonable on paper. All of it designed to paint her as exactly what Lady Minseo Park wanted her to appear, an unfit mother from a questionable background who couldn't provide for her children without help from a criminal. She called Dae-young with shaking hands. Your family is trying to take my children. Dae-young arrived at Blackthorn Manor 30 minutes later, not bothering to wait for permission or announcement. He found his grandmother in her study exactly where he expected, reviewing documents with the family's attorney. Grandmother. His voice was quiet and deadly. Call it off. Lady Minseo looked up without surprise. I have no idea what you're referring to. The Child Services investigation. The grandparents' rights petition. All of it. Call it off now.
Ah.
She set down her pen with deliberate care. Ms. Bennett contacted you. I expected she would. You filed false reports painting her as an unfit mother. Dae-young's hands clenched at his sides, rage barely contained. You used your connections to weaponize child services against her. I filed accurate reports citing genuine concerns. Lady Minseo's voice remained perfectly calm. Unstable housing. Inconsistent income. Association with known criminals, namely you. All documented facts. You know she's a good mother. You know those children are loved and cared for. I know she's a woman who can barely support herself, let alone 3 children. I know she accepted a flat and trust funds from you despite knowing about your criminal activities. I know those children are being raised in an unstable environment. She stood, moving around the desk with measured grace. I'm protecting them, Dae-young, from her inadequacies and your dangerous associations. You're trying to destroy her to punish me. I'm giving her a choice. Lady Minseo pulled a document from her desk drawer, a contract thick with legal language. £2 million. In exchange, she signs away any claim to Park Family Resources, agrees never to contact us again, and takes the children far from London. Away from you, away from your criminal associates, away from the scandal they represent. She'll never agree. Then the investigation continues. And I think we both know what the outcome will be. His grandmother's smile was thin and cold. A single mother with employment instability and questionable judgment in romantic partners versus a respected family with unlimited resources willing to provide a stable, loving home. The courts will see reason. You can't take her children. I can ensure they're placed with appropriate guardians. Your cousin Margaret has been trying to conceive for years. She and her husband would be ideal. Proper British family, excellent education, suitable environment. The children would want for nothing. Except their mother. Dae-young moved closer, voice low and dangerous. You do this, and you'll never see them. I'll make sure of it. You have no leverage. You've already rejected your inheritance. You're about to lose your criminal operations when Victor Chin moves against you. You have nothing. She met his fury with absolute calm. But I'm not unreasonable. I'm giving Ms. Bennett 48 hours to accept the settlement. If she refuses, the investigation proceeds. Either way, you need to remember who you are. You're a park, or you were, until you threw it away for a woman who can't even keep her own children safe. I'm nothing like you. The words came out quiet but absolute. I'd rather be nobody than be someone who destroys families to maintain reputation. How noble. Lady Mincio returned to her desk, dismissing him with a gesture. Your nobility won't help those children when they're in foster care, while the courts sort out their future. Think about that before you encourage Ms. Bennett to refuse a very generous offer. Dae-young left his grandmother's study with the sick certainty that she meant every word. She would take Amara's children. She would use every connection, every resource, every manipulation at her disposal to prove Amara unfit and place the children with a suitable family. And the worst part was she might succeed. He found Amara sitting on her couch, Gloria having taken the children to the park to give her space. She looked up when he entered, her eyes red from crying but her voice steady. Your grandmother visited me an hour ago. Offered me £2 million to disappear with the children. I know. I just came from confronting her. She said if I refuse, she'll make sure I lose them anyway. That she has enough evidence and connections to prove I'm unfit. Amara's voice cracked. She called them bastards Dae-young. Said they'd be better off with a proper family than with their own mother. He sat beside her, careful to leave space. What did you tell her? I told her to go to hell. That my children aren't for sale. She turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. But what if she's right? What if I can't protect them? What if they really would be better off? Don't. He cut her off firmly. Don't let her make you doubt yourself. You're an incredible mother. Those children are loved and cared for and happy because of you. But I can't fight her. I don't have her resources or connections. I don't have anything except... She stopped, realization dawning in her eyes. That's why she offered the money. She knows she might not win. She's trying to scare me into running. She's trying to make you believe you have no choice.
Dot-e.
Amara wiped her face with shaking hands. How do I fight someone who can manipulate child services and buy judges and destroy me with a phone call? Dae-young looked at this woman who'd survived 3 years alone, who'd raised 3 children through poverty and exhaustion, who'd stood in his grandmother's study and told one of the most powerful women in London to go to hell. You don't fight her alone, he said quietly. You let me help. Really help, not just with money, but with everything. We fight her together. And when you walk away again? I won't. He met her eyes. I'll lose everything fighting her. My name, my remaining connections, probably my freedom when I have to burn down the criminal operations to protect you all. But I won't walk away. Not from you. Not from them. Not ever again. Amara studied him for a long moment, searching for the lie, the escape clause, the inevitable betrayal. You promise? I promise. She nodded once, then straightened her shoulders with visible effort. Then we fight, whatever it takes. Amara arrived at Blackthorn Manor unannounced, walking through the gates with her head high and fury radiating from every line of her body. The butler tried to stop her, but something in her expression made him step aside. She found Lady Mincio in the drawing room, taking afternoon tea with 2 society matrons who looked up in shock at the intrusion. Ladies, if you'll excuse us. Amara's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. Lady Mincio and I need to speak. Privately. The women looked to Lady Mincio, who waved them away with barely concealed irritation. When the door closed, she set down her teacup with deliberate care. Ms. Bennett, I don't recall inviting you. I'm here to respond to your offer. Amara moved further into the room, refusing to be intimidated by the portraits of ancestors staring down with painted judgment, by the furniture worth more than she'd earn in a lifetime, by centuries of accumulated wealth and power. £2 million to disappear with my children and never contact your family again. A generous offer. I trust you've come to accept.
No.
Amara met the older woman's eyes without flinching. I've come to tell you to your face that my children aren't for sale. Not for 2 million. Not for 20 million. Not for any amount of money you could offer. Lady Mincio's expression hardened. Then you're a fool. You could give them a good life far from here. Far from the scandal and danger that association with this family brings. They already have a good life. They have a mother who loves them and a father who's finally trying to be present. Amara stepped closer. They deserve to know their father, even if your family doesn't deserve to know them. How dare you? How dare I? Amara's voice rose. You filed false reports to have my children taken away. You offered me money to disappear. You called them bastards. You've done everything in your power to destroy me for the crime of loving your grandson. So yes, I dare. I dare to stand in your perfect house and tell you that you're wrong. That your precious reputation and legacy mean nothing compared to those 3 children. Lady Mincio stood slowly, her face pale with fury. Get out of my house. Gladly. Amara turned toward the door, then paused. But know this, you'll never know them. Win or lose in court, you'll never be their grandmother. You'll never hear them laugh or watch them grow or be part of their lives. Because I'll make sure they understand exactly what you try to do to us. And they'll choose me. Every single time. She walked out with her head high, leaving Lady Mincio standing alone in her drawing room, stunned into silence by a woman who refused to be intimidated by everything that had intimidated everyone else for 78 years. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Dae-young spent the weekend systematically dismantling the life he'd built, each decision feeling like removing a stone from a wall until the whole structure collapsed. Sunday evening, he met with Victor Chun in a warehouse in East London, neutral ground, both men accompanied by their most trusted associates. Victor listened with growing satisfaction as Dae-young laid out his offer. Complete information about the Park family's business operations, both legitimate and criminal, in exchange for safe departure from the organization and guaranteed protection for Amara and the children. You're giving me everything. Victor's smile was sharp. Your family's secrets, your connections, your territory. All of it. In exchange for my family's safety. Do we have a deal? You really love her that much? You'd betray your own blood. They stopped being my blood when they tried to take my children. Dae-young met Victor's eyes steadily. Do we have a deal? Victor studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand.
Deal.
Though I have to say, Park, I never thought I'd see you choose a woman over power. I'm not choosing her over power. I'm choosing love over fear. He shook Victor's hand, sealing the agreement that would end his criminal career and make him enemy to his own family. There's a difference. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, London sky threatening rain as Dae-young entered the family court building. His grandmother sat on one side of the courtroom with 3 expensive lawyers. Amara sat on the other with a single attorney from a legal aid clinic. The imbalance was stark and intentional. The Park's attorneys painted a picture of Amara as well-meaning but inadequate, unstable housing, inconsistent employment, poor judgment in romantic partners. They presented documentation of her financial struggles, medical appointments missed due to cost, the moves from flat to flat as she tried to keep ahead of rent she couldn't afford. Then they called Dae-young to testify. He took the stand aware that his grandmother expected him to support her case, to distance himself from Amara, to choose family loyalty over the children he barely knew. He could see the calculation in her eyes as her attorney approached. Mr. Park, how would you characterize your relationship with Miss Bennett? She's the mother of my children, and the bravest woman I've ever known. The attorney blinked, thrown off script. I see. And are you aware of her financial difficulties? I'm aware she's worked 3 jobs to support our children alone while I lived in luxury and did nothing. Yes. Do you have concerns about her ability to provide adequate care? None whatsoever. She's an extraordinary mother who's sacrificed everything for those children. Every difficulty she's faced is a direct result of my failure, not hers. Lady Minsio's face went white with fury. Her attorney scrambled. But Mr. Park, given your family's resources, wouldn't the children be better served?
No.
Dae-young cut him off. My family tried to buy Ms. Bennett's silence and threatened to take her children when she refused. They're not interested in the children's welfare. They're interested in controlling scandal and maintaining reputation. The children are loved, safe, and thriving with their mother. Any argument otherwise is a manipulation designed to punish Ms. Bennett for existing. The courtroom went silent. Lady Minsio stood abruptly, but the judge gestured her back down. Mr. Park, are you aware you're testifying against your own family? I'm testifying for my children. There's a difference. He continued for another 20 minutes, methodically dismantling every argument the Park's attorneys had built. He revealed the settlement offer, the attempts at intimidation, the weaponization of child services. He provided documentation of the trust funds he'd established, his own resignation from all Park family businesses, his commitment to supporting Amara and the children regardless of cost. When he finished, Amara's attorney stood. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence Mr. Park's resignation letters, documentation of threats made to Ms. Bennett, and character references from Ms. Bennett's employers and the children's pediatrician. The judge reviewed everything with careful attention. Finally, she looked up. I'm dismissing this petition. The evidence clearly shows Ms. Bennett provides a loving, stable home for her children. The concerns raised appear to be motivated by family conflict rather than genuine welfare issues. She turned to Lady Minsio. Lady Park, grandparents' rights exist to maintain beneficial relationships, not to punish parents for choices you disapprove of. This petition is denied. Lady Minsio stood with rigid dignity. Dae-young. Her voice carried across the courtroom. You are no longer a Park.
You are dead to this family.
I will ensure every door that opened for you, because of our name closes permanently. I know. He met her eyes without flinching. And I'd make the same choice again. She swept out with her attorneys trailing behind, and Dae-young stood in the courtroom feeling lighter than he had in years. Everything his family had given him was gone, his name, his inheritance, his position, his connections. He had nothing except a modest savings account and whatever he could build without the Park legacy behind him. He walked out of the courthouse into gray London afternoon, uncertain what came next, and found Amara waiting on the steps with all 3 children. Nadia saw him first, her small face breaking into a shy smile. Elijah waved enthusiastically. Micah watched with those solemn eyes that saw too much. You didn't have to wait, Dae-young said quietly. Yes, I did. Amara shifted Nadia on her hip. You chose us. The least we could do is be here when you came out. I don't have anything now. No family, no money, no connections. You have us. She said it simply, as if it was obvious. If you want us. He looked at his children, these 3 small people who barely knew him but were willing to give him a chance. Looked at Amara, who had every reason to hate him but was offering something that looked dangerously like hope. I want you, he said. All of you. More than I've ever wanted anything. Then we'll figure it out together. She held out her free hand. One day at a time. He took her hand, and for the first time in his life, Dae-young Park felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Dae-young's new flat in Kennington was a studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. No doorman, no heated floors, no view except brick walls and a sliver of sky. He stood in the center of the empty space the day he moved in, a suitcase of clothes, a laptop, a mattress being delivered later, and felt something that might have been peace. He'd lost everything the Parks had given him. This was what remained, himself, stripped of legacy and expectation. It would have to be enough. James Chun helped him establish the security consulting firm, leveraging Dae-young's decade of experience navigating dangerous situations without mentioning where that experience came from. Within 2 weeks, he had his first client, a tech startup worried about corporate espionage. The pay was a fraction of what he'd earned before, but it was honest work. That mattered now in ways it never had. Amara established boundaries with the careful precision of someone who'd been hurt before and refused to risk it again. He could visit the children 3 times a week, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Saturday afternoons. He was welcome to attend medical appointments and playgroup events if he gave advance notice. But their relationship, if it could be called that, was strictly co-parenting. Nothing more. "I need time," she said when he asked if they could ever be more than parents navigating shared custody. "You chose us in court, and I'm grateful. But trust isn't rebuilt in a day. You have to prove this is real." "How long?" "However long it takes." She met his eyes with quiet determination. "My children's stability matters more than my feelings or yours. They need to know you're permanent before I let us get attached." So he proved it the only way that mattered, by showing up. Tuesday evenings, he arrived at 6 o'clock exactly, never early enough to seem eager, never late enough to worry. He learned that Elijah needed dinner by 6:30 or became impossible, that Micah required precise routine or anxiety made him shut down completely, that Nadia watched everything with those perceptive eyes and reported back to her mother on his every move. Thursday evenings followed the same pattern, and slowly the children began to relax around him. Elijah chattered endlessly about his day, asking questions Dae-young didn't always know how to answer. "Why do birds fly? Where does rain come from? Do you think dinosaurs would like pizza?" He learned to say, "I don't know, let's find out," and discovered that researching answers together mattered more than having them immediately. Micah remained quiet but gradually moved closer during story time, until one Thursday he climbed into Dae-young's lap unprompted and stayed there for an entire book. Dae-young barely breathed, terrified of disrupting the moment, feeling the weight of his son's trust like something sacred. Nadia was harder. She maintained careful distance, watching him interact with her brothers with the wariness of someone appointed protector. It was 6 weeks before she spoke to him directly beyond polite responses, and 2 months before she accepted his help tying her shoes. "She's protective," Amara explained one evening after the children were asleep. "She's had to be. When I was working 3 jobs, she was the one making sure her brothers ate breakfast, helping them get dressed. She learned early that adults aren't always reliable. I'll prove I am, however long it takes." "I know you will." Something shifted in Amara's expression. "You already are." Amara's music school expanded in the spring. What had started as private lessons in community centers grew into a proper academy with 3 teachers and a waiting list of students. Dae-young helped where she'd let him, reviewing contracts, setting up accounting systems, installing security. Never pushing, never trying to take over, just supporting where needed. "You're good at this," she said one afternoon, watching him explain tax structures to her new bookkeeper. The legitimate business consulting thing. "Turns out the skills transfer. Who knew?" She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd given him since the courthouse. Who knew? The criminal threats dissolved through careful negotiation. Victor Chin got what he wanted: territory, connections, information. In exchange, Dae-young and his family were declared off-limits. Word spread through London's underworld. The former park heir had gone legitimate, his woman and children were protected, and anyone who touched them would answer to Victor personally. It wasn't forgiveness. It was business. But it meant Amara could walk home from work without looking over her shoulder, and that was worth more than pride. By summer, the children called him Papa without prompting. By autumn, Amara invited him to stay for dinner after visits, and they'd sit around her kitchen table like something approaching a real family. The conversations were still careful, still navigating 3 years of hurt, but they were talking. Really talking. "Why did you do it?" Amara asked one evening after the children were asleep, and they sat on her small balcony with tea. "Pushed me away 3 years ago. If it was really about protection, why not just tell me the truth? I thought if you knew the danger, you'd try to stay anyway. I thought cruelty was cleaner than honesty." He stared at his cup. "I was wrong about everything. I was a coward who convinced himself he was being noble." "You were." She was quiet for a moment. "But you're different now. I can see that." Am I? Or am I just another version of the same person making different choices? Does it matter? The choices are what count. She met his eyes in the dim light. You chose us. You keep choosing us every day. That's what matters. Winter arrived with early darkness and cold that seeped through inadequate windows. Dae-young helped Amara winterize the flat, installing weather stripping and updating the heating. Elijah caught a cold that turned into an ear infection, and Dae-young sat through the pediatrician appointment holding his son while the doctor examined him, feeling the absolute terror of being responsible for someone so small and vulnerable. You did good, Amara said afterward, watching him buckle a drowsy Elijah into his car seat. He was scared, but you kept him calm. I was terrified. So was I, the first 50 times. That's what being a parent is, being terrified, and doing it anyway. She touched his arm briefly. But you didn't run. That's what matters. Christmas approached, and Amara invited him to spend it with them. Just the 5 of them in her flat, nothing fancy. He arrived with modest gifts chosen carefully, books, art supplies, things the children would actually use. Watched Nadia's face light up over watercolors, Elijah's excitement over dinosaur encyclopedias, Micah's careful attention to the building blocks. Thank you, Micah said quietly, and then, thank you, Papa. The word hit Dae-young like absolution.
Papa.
Not the tall man or Dae-young, but Papa.
Permanent. His.
That evening, after the children finally crashed from sugar and excitement, he and Amara sat on her couch surrounded by torn wrapping paper. She leaned against him tentatively, and he froze, terrified of pushing too fast. Is this okay? She asked. More than okay. They sat in silence, her warmth against his side, and Dae-young thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago, terrified of vulnerability, controlled by family expectation, convinced that power mattered more than love. That man would have been horrified by this modest flat, these simple gifts, this ordinary Christmas. That man had been a fool. I'm glad you're here, Amara said quietly. Me too. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. And for the first time since he'd seen her in that garden with his children, he meant it with every part of himself. 18 months after the courthouse, Amara stood in her new townhouse in Dulwich, 3 bedrooms, a proper garden, a mortgage she could actually afford, and felt something she'd almost forgotten: contentment. The Music Academy occupied a converted shopfront in Brixton now, her name on the window in gold letters. 3 teachers worked with her, and the waiting list had grown long enough that she was considering hiring a 4th. The children had adjusted to their new school with the resilience of the young. Nadia was reading above her level and had announced she wanted to be a business lady like Mummy. Elijah had joined the football team and talked endlessly about becoming a professional player. Micah had found a friend who understood his need for routine and quiet, and the 2 of them built elaborate structures during playtime with focused intensity. They were thriving. Finally, genuinely thriving. And Dae-young had become part of their daily fabric in ways that no longer felt temporary or tentative. His security consulting firm had grown beyond anything he'd expected, working with tech companies and financial institutions to protect against corporate espionage. He'd moved from the studio in Kennington to a proper flat in Camberwell, close enough to visit easily, but maintaining appropriate space. 6 months ago, after a year of co-parenting that had slowly transformed into genuine friendship, he'd asked if they could try again. Not as the people they'd been 3 years ago. Those versions were gone, burned away by consequence and choice, but as who they'd become. I don't want to rush this, Amara had said, sitting across from him at a cafe while her mother watched the children. I don't want to risk their stability or my heart by moving too fast. Then we'll move slow. However slow you need. They'd been dating for 6 months now, if it could be called dating when they already shared children and history and complicated trauma. Dinner once a week without the children, learning each other again. Discovering that they still made each other laugh, still had that pull that had drawn them together years ago, but tempered now by understanding what was at stake. The children had noticed but hadn't commented, except for Elijah asking cheerfully why Papa didn't just move in, if he was going to be there all the time anyway. Amara had deflected, and Dae-young had let her, understanding that merging their lives permanently required certainty she wasn't ready to offer. Until tonight. The children were asleep upstairs, having been read to and tucked in by both parents in a routine that had become natural over months of practice. Summer evening light lingered past 9, and Dae-young found Amara in the kitchen cleaning up dinner dishes. "Leave those," he said. "Come outside with me." She followed him to the small garden behind the townhouse. Nothing grand, just a patch of grass and the sapling tree the children had claimed as their own. They sat on the bench Dae-young had built last month, his carpentry skills rusty but functional. "I've been thinking," he started, then stopped. Started again. "I want to tell you something about the man I used to be." "Dae-young, you don't have to."
Ida.
"Because I need you to understand how far I've come. How far we've come." He turned to face her in the dimming light. 3 years ago, I was someone who valued power over people, reputation over love, safety over courage. I made choices based on fear. Fear of my family's disapproval, fear of vulnerability, fear of what loving you might cost me. I know. We've talked about this. But I don't think you understand how fundamentally broken that version of me was. I convinced myself that pushing you away was noble, that protecting you meant destroying you, that I could live without you if it meant keeping you safe from my world. His voice roughened with emotion. I was so terrified of losing control that I controlled everything, including convincing myself I didn't love you. Amara was quiet, letting him speak. And then I saw you in that garden with 3 children I never knew existed, and everything I'd built my life on shattered. Every lie I'd told myself became obvious. Every choice I'd made was revealed as exactly what it was: cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. You were trying to protect me. I was trying to protect myself from having to fight for something that mattered. That's different. He took her hands, feeling them warm in his. But you and our children changed me. Not by saving me, I had to do that work myself, but by giving me something worth fighting for. Worth becoming better for. Dae-young. I'm not that man anymore, he continued. The one who let fear make his choices. The one who valued his family's approval over his own children. The one who thought love was something you could choose to stop feeling if the circumstances weren't convenient. He met her eyes. You didn't save me, Amara. I saved myself. But you gave me a reason to try. She was crying now, tears catching the last of the evening light. You've proved that. Over and over. You show up every day. You choose us every day. I know you're not that man anymore. Do you? He studied her face, seeing the remnants of old fear still lingering. Because sometimes I think you're still waiting for me to leave. To decide this is too hard or too ordinary or not worth the effort. To become that man again. Can you blame me? Her voice was soft but honest. You destroyed me once. Completely. And yes, I see how you've changed. I see how you are with the children, how you've built something honest and real. But there's still a part of me that's terrified. That I'll hurt you again. He finished her sentence. I know. And I can't promise I'll never hurt you, because we're human and humans hurt each other sometimes. But I can promise I'll never leave again. I'll never choose anything over you and our children. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that if you'll let me. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and they sat in silence while stars began appearing in the darkening sky. From upstairs, they could hear Elijah's voice calling out in his sleep, something about football and dinosaurs, then settling again. I bought something, Dae-young said eventually, pulling a small box from his jacket pocket. Not a ring box. Too soon for that, they both knew, but something else. He opened it to reveal a key on a simple chain. What's this? A key to my flat. I'm not asking to move in. I know we're not there yet, but I want you to have it. I want you to know that what's mine is yours, always. That you and the children are welcome in every part of my life, without asking permission or waiting for invitation. Amara took the key, holding it carefully. This feels significant. It is. It's me telling you that I'm in this completely. No walls, no escape routes, no part of my life that's separate from you. He paused. And maybe, when you're ready, you'll give me a key to this house. Not because I'm moving in tomorrow or next month, but because we're building towards something permanent. Because we're a family, and families don't keep parts of themselves locked away. She turned the key over in her fingers, and he could see her processing, weighing, deciding. Then she reached into her own pocket and pulled out a key, the spare to her townhouse, the one she'd been carrying for weeks, trying to find the courage to offer. "I've been carrying this around for a month," she admitted, waiting for the right moment, or maybe for enough courage. "And now I think we've both been brave enough." She handed him the key. "This is me trusting you. Really trusting you. Not perfectly. I'm still scared sometimes. But enough to build something real with you." He took the key, feeling its weight like a promise. They sat in the garden as full darkness settled, two people who'd found each other, lost each other, and found each other again. Different now, scarred but healing, learning that love wasn't the desperate passion of their youth, but something steadier, deeper, built on choice renewed daily. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I've loved you since the moment you smiled at me over piano keys and told me music could change the world. I'll love you until I stop breathing, and probably long after that." "I love you too," she whispered back. "And I'm terrified of it. But I'm more terrified of not taking this chance." They sat together in their small garden, keys exchanged, building something that would last. 3 months later, Dae-young took Amara back to the garden where they'd exchanged keys, their garden now, in the home they'd begun truly building together. The children were with Gloria for the evening, a rare night alone that they'd learned to treasure. Autumn had painted the leaves gold and crimson, and the air carried the crispness of approaching winter. "I have something for you," he said, and she laughed. "You're always giving me things. The key, the security system for the academy, that ridiculous coffee maker. This is different." He pulled a small box from his pocket, velvet, worn at the edges, clearly vintage. Not the kind of ring box that came from exclusive jewelers with the Park family crest. Something else entirely. Amara's breath caught. "Dae-young. Let me say this first." He opened the box, revealing a sapphire ring. Deep blue stone surrounded by small diamonds, elegant but not ostentatious, the kind of ring chosen for the person wearing it rather than for show. "This was my mother's. The only thing I kept when I walked away from the parks. I've been carrying it for months, waiting for the right moment, or maybe for enough courage." "Your mother's ring." Her voice was barely a whisper. "She died when I was 8. I don't remember much about her, except that she was kind, that she laughed easily, that my grandmother disapproved of her because she'd married for love instead of strategy." He met Amara's eyes. "I think she would have loved you, loved our children, loved that I finally chose love over legacy." Tears were already streaming down Amara's face. "I'm not proposing because it's expected or because enough time has passed or because it's the next logical step." He got down on one knee in their small garden, holding his mother's ring. "I'm proposing because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life choosing you. Not over duty or family or reputation. Those things don't compete with you anymore. You are my family. You are my choice. Always. Dae-young. I will choose you when it's easy and when it's hard. When we're happy and when we're fighting about whose turn it is to handle Elijah's energy at 3 a.m. When the children are thriving and when they're struggling. When business is good and when money is tight. Every single day, I will wake up and choose you." She was crying too hard to speak, so he continued. "I can't promise perfection. I can't promise I won't make mistakes or that loving me will always be easy. But I can promise I'll never leave. I'll never choose anything over you and our children. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the second chance you gave me." He held out the ring. "Amara Bennett, will you marry me?" She dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face in her hands.
"Yes."
"Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if his mother had chosen it across decades for this exact moment. They kissed in their garden while autumn leaves fell around them, two people who'd found each other, lost each other, and found each other again, finally whole. The wedding was small, held in the same garden on a crisp December afternoon. No grand estate or hundreds of guests, no society photographers or strings of ancestors watching with painted judgment. Just the people who mattered, Gloria, beaming through happy tears. James Chun, who'd stood by Dae-young through everything. Catherine Worthington, who'd become an unexpected friend to Amara and brought a gift of antique books for the children. A handful of teachers from the academy. The family who'd helped Amara survive when Dae-young wasn't there. No parks attended. The absence was noted. Amara had sent an invitation to Lady Mincio as a courtesy, knowing it would be refused. It arrived back unopened, stamped, returned to sender, in precise handwriting. The rejection should have hurt, but standing in their garden preparing to marry the woman he loved, Dae-young felt only relief. He'd spent too many years controlled by family approval. Their absence was freedom, not loss. The children were impossibly excited. Nadia as flower girl, taking her duties with fierce seriousness. Elijah and Micah as ring bearers, though Elijah had to be reminded 6 times not to play with the rings before the ceremony. They'd practiced walking down the aisle for weeks, and still Elijah skipped instead of walked, earning laughter from the small gathering. Amara wore a simple dress, ivory silk, elegant but understated, the kind of dress chosen for comfort and joy rather than impression. No borrowed elegance this time. Everything was hers, earned and chosen freely. Dae-young wore a suit from a high street shop, and it felt more honest than any bespoke tailoring he'd worn in his old life. They'd written their own vows. Dae-young went first, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Amara, 3 years ago, I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too afraid to fight for it. I convinced myself that walking away was noble, that I was protecting you by breaking your heart. I was wrong about everything except how much I loved you. He took her hands. You could have turned me away when I came back. Could have kept our children from me, and no one would have blamed you. But you gave me a chance to prove I'd changed. To earn the privilege of being their father and your partner. You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve, and I promise I'll spend every day earning it. Amara's vows were simpler, more direct. Dae-young, you broke my heart once.
Completely.
And I swore I'd never let anyone hurt me like that again. But you came back. You chose us over everything. Your family, your wealth, your entire life. You proved through actions, not words, that you'd changed. That you were worth risking my heart again. She smiled through tears. I'm still scared sometimes. But I'm choosing you anyway. Choosing us. Choosing the family we're building together. The officiant pronounced them married, and Elijah cheered so loudly several pigeons fled from nearby trees. The children rushed forward, demanding to be part of the hug, and they all collapsed in a laughing pile in the garden while James took photos. Later, after cake and champagne, and the children finally crashed from exhaustion, Dae-young found Amara in their living room. She'd kicked off her shoes, the ivory dress slightly rumpled, her hair escaping its pins. She looked absolutely perfect. Come here, she said, and he settled beside her on the couch. They sat in comfortable silence, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, listening to the house settle around them. Upstairs, one of the children, probably Micah, stirred and called out in sleep, then quieted. We should take a family photo, Amara said eventually. Something to remember this day. They gathered the children, groggy and protesting but eventually cooperative, in the living room. James set up his camera on a timer, positioning them on the couch. Dae-young and Amara in the center, Nadia on Amara's lap, the boys squeezed in beside Dae-young. Everyone say family, James called. But Elijah, being Elijah, made a ridiculous face at the last second, tongue out, eyes crossed, and infected his siblings with giggles. The photo captured them all laughing, imperfect and real, a family not defined by bloodlines or estates, but by choice renewed daily. Dae-young looked at that photo later, at his children's faces, at Amara's joy, at his own expression of contentment he'd never worn in any Park family portrait. He'd lost everything his family had given him, the name, the wealth, the power, the legacy. And he'd gained everything that mattered. These were the choices that defined a person, Not the ones forced by duty or fear or family expectation, but the ones made from love. He'd chosen love over legacy, chosen vulnerability over safety, chosen a modest home and honest work and 3 children who called him Papa over everything the Parks represented. And love had chosen him back. In their small townhouse in Dulwich, surrounded by the people who mattered, Dae-young Park, no longer a park at all, just a man, a father, a husband, had finally found his way home. Not to a grand estate or a powerful family, but to a woman who'd given him a second chance and children who'd taught him what really mattered. He'd spent his first life accumulating things that meant nothing. This second life, built on love and choice and daily recommitment, was everything. And it was more than enough. It was perfect. Thank you for sticking with Amara's story until the very end. If you enjoyed this journey through moral complexity and difficult choices, subscribe so you never miss another one. We've got more stories about people navigating impossible situations, making hard choices, and discovering that change is messy but possible. I'll see you in the next story.